Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. The app is simple. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports app today and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and NIL Game Changers. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and Sunbury Motor Company. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
PurdyInsurance.com. Auto and light business, boat, motorcycle, RV. Multiple insurance needs. They organize, handle them all, make sure you're fully insured, and they do everything they can to save you money. Customer service means everything to them. At Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury, go to PurdyInsurance.com. By the way, Todd, you don't have to write down the 888 number on gambling problem. Okay, the suit has it on speed dial. So don't worry about it. Okay, just figure it out. Yeah, just thought I'd mention that to you. That way you weren't wasting time. Everybody knows how much I love baseball. Well, I love talking baseball with Scott Lauber. Scott, welcome. It is an absolute pleasure as always. Thanks so much for your time.
Sure, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing great. It doesn't feel like baseball weather, but it's fun to talk baseball. So 3 guys get in, Ichiro, CC Sabathia, and Billy Wagner. How many did you end up voting for? Because I believe you get a max of 10, if I recall.
That's right, yeah. So I had 7 check marks on my ballot this year. I had the 3 players who got in addition to Carlos Beltran, Chase Utley, Felix Hernandez, and I added Andy Pettit this year. So that was my group. I did have some spaces available, and I thought long and hard as usual about Jimmy Rollins. I gave David Wright a lot of thought this year, Dustin Pedroia as well, and those will all. I'm happy to say those guys will all be on the ballot again next year. So I'll get a good chance to go back over them again. But that's kind of where I was, where I landed. So it's interesting. It's a good group. I thought it was a really good ballot this year. There were a lot of really, really good candidates, and I thought more about this year's ballot, I think, than probably almost any other, and I've been voting for 10 years. So there's a lot to think about and a lot to keep thinking about as their candidacies continue.
Were you disappointed in all? I mean, you vote the way you vote, but I think Chase Utley only got like 36, 37%. So he's got ways to go to build up that number. Disappointed you get a little more support based on what you know about him?
Maybe a little bit. I think he got an 11-point bounce this year, which was the 3rd largest that I could see. Pettit got a nice bounce, as I kind of expected he would. I kind of call that the Sabathia effect. I think a lot of voters were like me. They looked at CC Sabathia and thought, well, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. And then they looked at Andy Pettit's numbers and were sort of struck by how similar they were. I wanted to be careful because I don't think Andy Pettit had the career that Sabathia had. It's one thing to look at the numbers and to say, well, boy, the wins were similar and the ERA was similar and all of that. But, if you watched, and this is where I think we have to be careful sometimes that we don't dive too deep. You want to do a deep dive, obviously, into the numbers and the careers, but that we don't get too sort of blinded by the numbers, because anybody who watched their careers, there was something different about when CC Sabathia pitched. He was an ace in every sense of the word. There was a reason why he started, something like 11 opening days. They were teammates together, Pettit and Sabathia, in New York for 4 years. And I actually went back and looked every single time that they were both available, either to start an opening day or to start game one of a playoff series, the Yankees started Sabathia. So, look, I mean, the sport told us over and over again that Sabathia was an ace of aces, right? But I thought Pettit's numbers were stood up really strong to Sabathia's. I thought Pettit's postseason kind of put him over the edge for me. I think a lot of voters felt the same way. So he got a nice bounce, and I think there was one other, the name escapes me now. There was one other player. Maybe I think it might have been Carlos Beltran who got a higher bounce than Utley, but 11 points from the first year to the second year. I think he's still in good shape. He's right at that 40% mark, basically. And I think with no real strong first ballot candidates the next 2 years, he could make some more gains and kind of be in a position maybe in 27 or 28 to kind of climb over that 75% mark.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the postseason part. It's one thing. What kind of role, because not everybody, Ernie Banks never played a postseason game, different time, different set of circumstances. But what role can postseason play in your mind in swinging you one way or the other?
Yeah, I kind of look at it. I do look at it. I do think it's important. But I also don't think it's, maybe it's sort of a separator in some ways. I always gave Curt Schilling a lot of credit for his postseasons.
Sure.
I was a Schilling voter for many years. It kind of nudged me over the top with Pettit this year. I guess it can also be a little bit of a detractor. It did not affect me with Billy Wagner, whose postseason numbers were not good in his career. And also, I do look at players who had successful postseason track records. But I voted for Felix Hernandez this year. He never got to the postseason, and it wasn't his fault because for 10 years he was as good as it gets as aces go in the American League. There just weren't real good teams around him in Seattle. So I do think it can be a little bit of a separator, and maybe it nudges you one way or the other. But I don't look at it necessarily as a disqualifier or a or just hey, this guy was great in the postseason, let's put him in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because I think Schilling was 11-2 in the postseason. I mean, the bigger the moment, the better he seemed to pitch. And we're talking baseball here. I'm not talking about what you think about what he thinks.
Right. Exactly.
How much do you have to separate that? Because you have to deal with a lot of players, talk to them firsthand. They aren't all angels, and some of them rub you the wrong way. Even if they rub you the wrong way, how important is it for you to objectively put one against the other, even if a guy rubs you the wrong way?
I think it's really important. Look, I'll take it from the other side. David Wright, I covered David Wright in the minor leagues in 2004 in Binghamton, New York. I was the baseball writer there for a small newspaper. He was in Double-A, and he was like 21 years old. And to this day, he's one of my favorite players that I've ever covered. And I wouldn't say we're in touch regularly or anything, but we've stayed in touch over the years. It's the same way as it was then. And I grapple with his candidacy because, I think he had a really, really high peak. I think it was maybe a little short because of injuries. I think it was probably a year or two short for me. And I really go back and forth, and I try to block out how I feel about David Wright as a human being.
Right.
When I look at his credentials. It's hard to do. It's hard to do because you feel a certain fondness for someone, or you've got a relationship with someone, but you do have to kind of put that aside. And I think it works both ways. Obviously, the only time that I've ever honestly held anything against anyone and it has nothing to do with a with a relationship or with how I was treated by a certain person. I don't vote for Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez and players of their ilk because, for me, if you fail the drug test after MLB instituted testing in 2004, to me that's disqualifying. That's the only sort of character thing that I've ever really utilized because I think, look, if you did it after MLB said you can't do it anymore, you knew what you were doing and you flouted the rules. So to me, that's a strike against you. But other than that, I mean, I've tried to sort of, if you're asking about personal feelings for someone, you try to do your best to kind of put that aside.
Yeah, if anybody, and we know David Ortiz was on that list, that was on that list that was covertly over whatever released to the New York Times, that doesn't bother you at all. It's when they actually put the policy in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the line of demarcation, right, is 2004, I guess, was the first year that players were tested and suspended if they tested positive. So, I mean, we can talk about David Ortiz a lot. I covered him for a good many years in Boston, and talked a lot about that New York Times report and other, steroid-related things with him, and came to the conclusion that look, who knows what anybody does, right? But I mean, he didn't fail a test after 2004. So for me, he was a check mark.
Yeah, let me put it this way. I don't think people realize how often he got tested after 2004. I mean, like a lot. And that's what people don't realize. And he passed all of them. Okay? That's something that's one of those underreported things because they'll talk about 2003, and justifiably so. But you were around him. It's like it was a constant, come on, David, let's go.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It was all the time. When do you start looking to next year's ballot? Do you start looking at possibilities who's on next year's ballot? Do you start doing that now, or do you like to take a deep breath?
Yeah, it's funny. I do take a peek. For people who don't know, the ballot arrives at your door and right around Thanksgiving, and it's due back in the mail. You actually have to mail it by New Year's Eve. So you've got about a month or so to spend with it. And I kind of really dig in December and, the middle of December or so. And I do take a peek because one of my personal rules is that once I vote for someone, I want to continue to vote for them. I don't want to have to. You can vote for a maximum of 10. I don't want to have to take away a vote because I run out of space. So I do look, I do peek, and I do sort of think a little bit about my votes now and how it may influence how I vote for someone who's coming up. So, the name that really kind of popped for me when I looked ahead to next year was Cole Hamels. He'll most likely be on the ballot for the first time. And, I mentioned Andy Pettitte and how Sabathia coming on the ballot this year kind of made me look a little bit differently at Andy Pettitte. And he was the last name I checked. And as I was going to the mailbox, I thought, well, now I'm going to have a tough decision to make with Cole Hamels, right? So for better or worse, it's going to make me look even harder at Hamels to sort of see, like, how does he stack up to Pettitte, right? And guys of that nature. So, yeah, I look at it. And now, now that the voting's done and, I probably won't think a whole lot about it until the ballot arrives in November. But, yeah, I mean, it's there. It's in the back of your mind. You're like, well, this guy's coming on, and I'm going to have to, dig in a little bit on him and make a decision. And again, I want to be sure. So, like, I don't, one of the things I hate about this process is that people think when you don't vote for someone that you're voting against them.
I know.
I don't see it that way. Like, I haven't voted for Jimmy Rollins, but it doesn't mean I won't, and B, it's not a knock on Jimmy Rollins. I tend to think of it as the people you vote for, you're elevating them. If they're on the ballot, and one thing I think we don't celebrate enough is what it means to just be on it. If you're on the ballot, it probably means you're in the top 3 to 4% of players who played of all time. And what the Hall of Fame is asking the voters to do is sort of take that group and whittle it down to 1 to 1.5%. And so you're not denigrating someone by not voting for them. They're already great. You're just elevating the people you do vote for. And I want to be pretty sure when I vote for someone that I'm not going to, a year later, I'm not going to look back and go, why did I vote for that guy? Or oh no, I'm going to run out of space and I'm going to have to drop someone. So I think you want to give it a lot of thought, and I think most voters feel this way. And you want to make sure that you feel good about as good as you can for a pretty subjective exercise, that you feel pretty good about, at least about your process.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was talking with my broadcasting class this morning, and I said, I don't want you guys to ever sit there and say X player stinks. I said, and here's the reason why. There are 8 billion people in the world. 156 have their tour card. I said, he doesn't stink. He's just not as good as Tiger Woods. Well, Jimmy Rollins, great player. Very few people in the history of the world have been able to do what he's done. But now you're whittling it down to, is he one of those 2 to 3 guys, or in your case, I think you voted for 7 out of 8 billion people in the world that you think can make, at this hour, the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's about what it is. It's not you knocking somebody else. It's just you feel like at this hour you have better choices.
Yeah, I mean, hundreds of thousands, right? First of all, you think about how good you have to be to play Major League Baseball. And
that's right.
And then, you take that group and how great you have to be on the Hall of Fame ballot, right? There were 28 names on the Hall of Fame ballot this year. And then, how elite of elite you have to be to get a check mark on that ballot. So that's why I say, I think we don't make a big enough deal when the ballot comes out about, who's on it and how great those guys were, and even the ones who fall off after 1 year, you made the Hall of Fame ballot, and that's extraordinary. So, again, you get into these arguments, and I'm also quite careful, or I try to be, at least when I write about, players' candidacies, and, to make sure that, look, it's not, when I say that so-and-so's, OPS plus or their hit total or whatever was lower than so-and-so's, it's not, you're not knocking the guy who's like the lesser of those two. You're saying, this guy's greater than, so it's hard. It's hard to do without making it sound like you're being critical of someone. I know Billy Wagner pretty well, or a little bit, and heard some of his comments yesterday, and he was talking about how excruciating it was to be on the ballot for 10 years and to consistently miss and fall short. And I have no doubt in my mind that it was excruciating for him to go through that for 10 years. But, I also think that, if you're, it's probably easier said than done. If you're taking it personal that, you come in at 40% instead of 75%, well, what are we arguing over here? Whether you were, the top 2% of players who ever played or the top 1.5%. We're really the difference is so minuscule that, to be on the Hall of Fame ballot for 10 years, even if he had fallen short, would have been nothing for him to be disappointed by.
That's why I've always laughed, because there's a friend of mine who's so mad that Derek Jeter wasn't unanimous because Dan Shaughnessy didn't vote for him. I said, once you clear 75%, who cares? It's like that. You're in. So I do have to ask you about the guy that also fell one vote shy of being unanimous, and that's Ichiro. When you watched Ichiro, what was it about him, or the multitude of things about him, where you said, man, that is a Hall of Fame player I'm watching it right now?
Yeah, when you see it, right? And there was nothing he did that was that you could really nitpick, right? He was bat-to-ball skills, contact skills, ability to find holes on the field. He could run, he could throw. I thought about this when Ricky Henderson passed away last month, what it was like in the, I'm in my late 40s. I grew up watching Ricky Henderson play. What it was like when he got on first base, right? And how, suddenly you were watching first base. You weren't watching the hitter because you were wondering when he was going to take off and go. And for all those hits that Ichiro had, how many times you saw him, slap a single through the middle, and then before you knew it, he was standing on third base. If you think about what he did, I actually looked back at it again the other day. Like the first season he came over from Japan, 27 years old, won the batting title, won the Rookie of the Year, and won the MVP on a team that won 116 games.
Right.
How extraordinary is that? Most hits in a single season. So, greatest of the great players, and kind of a, even for when he played, certainly if he was playing now, you'd call him kind of a throwback because, he didn't, it wasn't like all about power, and it wasn't all about, hitting the ball out of the ballpark, but it was getting on base, it was making things happen, it was doing everything well. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of Ichiro. He did everything well. And, you talk to people around the game, people he played with, and they say, like, if Ichiro wanted to hit 30 home runs, he could have hit 30 home runs.
That's right.
But that wasn't the kind of player he was, and it wasn't how he could best help his team. So, tremendous player, and look, people are going to get all wrapped up in the fact that somebody didn't vote for him, and as a journalist, I do love transparency, right? I think we ask for transparency from the people we cover, and we can provide it, when we do something like vote for a Hall of Fame. But hey, look, ultimately people do what they want to do with their ballots, and while I would love to know why one person didn't vote for him, you can't get hung up on that either. Good luck getting 400 people in a room to agree on anything like that. It's January 22nd. 400 people can't agree on the day of the week. So, I'm not surprised it wasn't unanimous. A little disappointing, but at the end of the day, it doesn't diminish his greatness or, the fact that it was just 99.7% is overwhelming.
I think he's in. Because interesting, you talk about the home run thing. I'd watch Wade Boggs in batting practice. He could hit a home run anytime he wanted, but that's not how he played. Hey, right. Scott, absolute pleasure. Always love talking baseball. I don't care what the temperature is out. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve. Anytime.
Scott Lauber, outstanding, Philadelphia Inquirer. This half hour brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15, Hummels Wharf, online at sunburymotors.com. And this half hour brought to you by Purdy Insurance. Market Street in Sunbury, go to purdyinsurance.com.
There's something to be said about a sale with a handshake, a service technician who really knows what he's doing. They can explain it in English what the problem is. There's nothing better than having that friend you could trust in the area. That's Sunbury Motors, where you get selection, knowledgeable salespeople, and prices that fit your budget, and more important, that friend you can trust. Welcome to Sunbury Motors, Kia, Ford, and Hyundai. You could shop other dealers and compare prices, but at Sunbury Motors, you get their lowest price promise. They research the current used vehicle market and guarantee their used car prices are the lowest. If you find a lower price, Sunbury Motors will beat it. 3 dealers all in one. See their full new and pre-owned inventory at sunburymotors.com. Pick out a vehicle you like and schedule your test drive online. Follow them on Facebook. Sunbury Motors Ford and Hyundai, North 4th Street, Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummels Wharf.